Okay, evening all on playchess.com and Twitch TV, following on Twitch TV. I thought this week I could carry on the Evolution of Style series, which is a very important playlist on my channel, my YouTube channel actually. It's something which I think is of great historical importance to track where we came from, to see where we are now. Alexander Alekhine regained his world champion title, and I was just curious, what happened after, and did he have encounters with Capablanca, or is it true he avoided Capablanca like the plague? This Olympiad could have been interesting because Capablanca was representing Cuba. Alekhine at this time in 1939 was representing France. Let's have a look at some of his games with the white pieces in particular. Hi all on Twitch TV. Okay, so with the white pieces, China, an opponent from the Chinese team, I believe, was it Chile? Chi, should have checked that out. Actually, it's more likely to be Chile. Castillo, Larenas, Mariana. I think that's more Chilean name. CHI, country code. Alekhine's was FRA France, that's clear cut. So he was playing white against Castillo, Larenas, and he played d4. I just wanted to see the style of play in particular, any stylistic tendencies here which could be observed. Black actually didn't play kind of a Slav thing, but played c5, an early c5, so this is already an interesting opening. And we see d5. So is this position that bad for black? Well, we see actually check Benoni, e5. Black's trying to keep a closed centre, and Alekhine reacts with e4, so he's not committing his c pawn just yet. And after d6, does he want a pawn on c3? I think sometimes you can just put a knight here, and he does that because you want to maybe accelerate f4 sometimes to put pressure on this pawn chain. In particular here, d6 is a standard kind of weakness. If you can get access to later, you'll be doing very nicely. Black is probably anticipating an f4 and will try and grab some dark squares. If white's going to play f4, often the e5 square is up for grabs, and this next move looks a bit crazy, like breaking opening rules, but I think it's trying to grab some dark squares in the eventuality of f4. Black plays knight e7, so you can see this mechanism would be unveiled with knight g6, and black would have that e5 square. Sorry, Bukaka, is this game played at Buenos Aires Olympiad? Yes. Sorry, it's the 8th Olympiad final in Buenos Aires, 1939, the 16th of September 1939. So I'm taking you back in time, the evolution of chess style. Okay, so CHI, I guess, is Chile, not China. I don't think China was participating at that time. So G3. Okay, so white's not playing for f4. He's maybe trying to restrict this knight. Although this knight's ready to pounce on e5, this knight's kickable on g6, and it's interrupting black's normal development here. I'm hoping, by the way, that there is sounds okay everywhere. Everyone can hear everything so far. Okay, so here we see h4, just wanting to kick the knight. So not routine opening from either side. Now if black wants to play h5, black is making a compromise for that g5 square. White could perch a knight there, or knight f3, but knight h3 actually avoids a pin. It might be useful to play knight h3 to g5 on h5. And instead we see black just not minding white playing h5. So bishop e7, and Alexander does this h5, knight f8. So is this an absolutely crazy plan, or is it part of black's provocation strategy, because actually, you know, there is a weakness of g5 here. You can imagine this kind of maneuver, and if you exchange off the dark square bishops, then black might have a lot of dark squares to play with later on a dark square strategy. Check, knight bd7, a4, clamping down on a6 and b5, and black's got some congestion here though. So bishop drops back here, and now h6. We see this idea that black wants to exchange off the dark squared bishops in this position. You know, white has weakened his own dark squares. So bishop e3, bishop g5. Okay, so queen d2. So what does Alexander do stylistically against, you know, a great provocation to weaken his dark squares? What is he actually trying to do with this position? He's, for a start, after knight h7, he's still not tempted to give up e5 square control. He's not playing f4 here, even though it might seem tempting. Just plays knight f3, and now black takes. So black's the one to release that staring tension of the two bishops. Queen takes e3, now black castles. So at the moment, white's a long way off from a kingside attack here. You can imagine g4, then there's hassle because black's got that g5 lock here. So actually there's another weakness in the position, which is like standard weakness in Benoni to pick on. And we see knight d2. This is a very modern maneuver to get c4 to eye this d6 weakness. So b6, knight c4, and the queen protects it for a moment. And now here, with the queen committed on the queen side here, white now plays f4. Okay, black's not in the position to exploit the e5 square in this position here. Black just plays rook e8. Now Alexander castles, rook b8. Okay, so b5's going to arrive on the scene soon. Just b3 for the moment. You know, maybe white can just take a knight a5 to c6. It's not such a big deal, surely. f6. We see queen f2, king h8. So manoeuvring now. Knight e3, and this is pretty neat. White might want to get rid of this bishop for this bishop, because there's a lot of weak squares which might be tapped into if these bishops can be traded off. Rook a8, rook h1, bishop d7, queen f1. Eyeing a6, this little battery on a6, teasing black a little bit here with queen f1. That's protected. King g2, bishop d3. A lot of manoeuvring in this game. Okay, knight c4, manoeuvring. So a bit like modern chess, that sometimes there's no obvious weakness. You have to carry on playing. You have to try and provoke the opponent into making mistakes. So we get a lot of manoeuvring in such a game. So here, rook a1. Bukaka, Alekhine plays like Tigran Petrosian. Yeah, this is a great, you know, example of positional play really so far. At move 34, you know, white is preventing b5, I still believe, with just taking a knight a5. I think that might be disastrous. Although the rook's loose in this particular moment in time, I still think it's overall going to be disastrous because b5 is a weakness. So we see bishop d7, knight e3, rook a7, rook af1, queen b8, rook a1, bishop c8, queen g2, rook e8, queen f1. Okay, we can still say that black is tied down here. Knight c4, queen d8, queen d1. Now finally there's a threat, wake up, there's a threat of bishop g4, because if we exchange off, as I say, these two bishops, we're gaining access to a whole colour complex, and that's really, really exciting, isn't it? So time to wake up here. Rook a e7, bishop g4, the keys have been unlocked to the car here, the car being the light squares. We just get rid of these bishops. Very strategic game. Slow, patient manoeuvring. Black didn't have any clear advantageous breaks so far in this game. But tactically, with the rooks doubled like this, black might be relying on a tactical f5. And in fact, we see e takes f4 now, which normally would be a really bad idea. because it's increasing the number of pawns in the centre, and white's still controlling the e5 square. Okay, so f5 though here. Things have really hotted up. Now with f5, has Alechine's plan gone wrong? If he, say, takes this pawn, then surely knight f6, and you know, this is attacked, this is attacked. Is that very nice? No, perhaps not. So he retreats the bishop. And we see a forcing move sequence available here, that if black actually takes fe, we can just take this bishop on c8 and play knight takes d6 next, and I think there's not much compensation there for black losing the exchange. So okay, so black plays in this position b5. Now white grabs this a file though, a takes, and does take on b5, offering a trade, you know, b pawn for e pawn. Rook takes e4, but then d6 is dropping off. This is taken, but black's idea now is to try and generate some play. Queen h4 hitting the rook. So has black generated some counterplay here? It's quite committal though, this sequence. Black's rooks are forked here. Queen f3, knight f6, offering both rooks, but this knight g4 seems very dangerous in this position. Okay, so white's got a choice of rooks, and actually he really doesn't want to take that, because surely taking, we've got this bishop unleashed as well. So the lesser evil rook to take here is surely the rook on e8, and he does take the rook on e8, and we see knight g4 check, king g2, rook takes e8, and forcing move, bishop takes g4, fg, queen g3. So white's the exchange up, but it can be a potentially difficult position here. But f5 is a liberating move for white's pieces, giving the queen access. You know, maybe knight d6 next if bishop takes, which would fork rook and bishop. So I'm not really sure black's tactical sequence is that convincing right now, but there is some draftiness around the king here, and this pawn, you know, this diagonal looks a bit dangerous. Bishop b7, so he has to manage black's counterplay. Rook d1, knight g6 played. Okay, which is a tactical move. If we take, then bishop d5 is possible, for example. I think that's the main idea. So, and in fact, that is taken. Bishop takes d5, rook takes, queen takes. Can white, pardon me, escape the checks? It's giving a chance to Alexander to go wrong. I think if king h2, if he's in time trouble especially, it would be a disaster. I think rook e1, or near disaster, for everything made. Mind you, there's rook f8 here. No. I think maybe white's just winning this. There's rook f8 mating there. So I think white's just winning this. He played actually king g1. On king h2, pardon me, there's queen. The annoying thing here would be queen h5. And that looks like a perpetual check scenario. So the king has to go, I think it has to go to g1 as he played it. Inviting this check, but now rook f1. He is a piece up. Takes, check. Okay, queen takes g6. At move 60, he's like a piece up for not much compensation. Check, knight e3, threatening queen f5 just to get rid of the queens. Check. I think black's resistance is limited here now, and piece down. He resigns. Black resigns in this position. Okay, it's not your bog standard clear-cut little game. I'm really just looking at raw games the year after he became world champion at the Olympiad, and so it's a pretty complex game, pretty complex positional play in some respects. A 67 mover. Did anyone get anything from that game? Should we just quickly review it in summary, or should we move on to another game which is easier? What do you reckon? I've got some other games to look at, or we could just quickly make some positional notes here about this Czech Benoni. I think it might be easier just to make some quick revision notes, that black with this check Benoni structure is aiming for a dart square strategy to weaken white on the dart squares, to exchange this bishop for this bishop. White wants to exchange this bishop for that one, and we see these plans under the scenes here. So black using resourcefully that g5 square to try and trade this bishop for this bishop. Okay, and then white later is maneuvering around to play bishop g4. If you look at all the maneuvers which follow here, clamping down on b5 at the same time and arranging a knight e3 for this eventual strategic exchange of bishop g4 coming up. So this is the underlying plan against a very fixed, very fixed and very committal pawn structure of the check Benoni. It's a bit like drafts, but we have these light square weaknesses to pick on. If only the light square bishop didn't exist on c8. Okay, so white's maneuvering for this bishop g4 very patiently here. So he's starting to prepare, and he's getting in the position now for bishop g4. It's a key strategic moment at move 42. So now takes, it gets an explosion of tactics now, with black initiating this f5. So this calm retreat bishop h3 needs to be carefully calculated now, because does white potentially have a weak pawn on h5? Okay, he's relying on bishop c8 and knight d6. This knight is causing black all sorts of problems here. So there's an irritation from that knight, and black plays b5, very committal sequence now again of a flutter of forcing moves. So rook takes e4, but losing d6, and now queen h4. So black's got a few threats, but essentially these threats were just parried, really. Queen f3, winning the exchange and offering, of course, the exchange back for a moment there. Well, actually no, black wasn't in the position to do that. It's just a completely lost position if he did that. If black tried to do this, it's completely and utterly lost. This position here, knight d6, in fact, what does black do? There's knight f7 check, end of game. It looks pretty bad. So black is in this forcing continuation, which he created, but it's just material down for not much. The last little thing to consider is the perpetual check possibilities with queen h5, but king g1, it's fine. White's just material up, end of game really. Alright, so let's look at another game from this Olympiad. So Alexander Alekhine playing white. Let's look at hopefully a shorter game, less complex. Yes, I guarantee this is a shorter, sweeter game here. And I think, oh sorry, I'm gonna have to just adjust the PGN tags just momentarily. Okay. Now this game does demonstrate to me a certain stylistic tendency of Alexander Alekhine. He played e4, and his opponent is Anaskazis, Erich Anaskazis, a Germany Olympiad team of 1939. So his opponent played. I've got the wrong number of moves here. This is a long game. That's not the right game. Sorry, pardon me. Just skipped a game. No, I want the short one first against Cordova. Against Cordova. The game against Cordova first. Okay, so against Cordova, e4, we see Cordova, Hugo Cordova for BOL. What's the country code? BOL. If anyone knows, please say. So Caracan, and Alekhine takes on d5 here, which does put black under great pressure in the center actually. Oh, Bolivia. Yes, that's what I kind of thought. Bolivia, okay. So c takes d5. Alekhine puts more pressure on the centre now. He plays the move c4. So this looks like what we call Botvinnik-Panov attack against the Caro-Kann, kind of is with a later c5, an early c5, but no, it's not quite that. But there's pressure on d5 here, and we see an instructive blunder, I believe, in this game. e6, knight f3. So far, so good. Black's not crumbling here. He's fairly solid. We've got arm wrestling over the d5 square. So bishop e7, bishop d3. But here is an instructive blunder, and it's interesting, I believe, to see how this is really punished by Alexander with very precise play and forcing sequences. Black takes time in this position to play the move b6. Now clearly, okay, the c8 bishop is an issue to deal with, but the king's still in the centre, and sometimes, you know, we forget king safety when we're thinking about more sophisticated things. So who here thinks b6 is a disaster or just a bad move? Do you think it's a disastrous move, or do you think it's just a bad move? This is Cordova, C-O-R-D-O-V-A, Cordova, Hugo Cordova. But he plays b6 here. So what do you think about this position at this moment? If I gave you 20 seconds, would you say white's much better, has got a tactical solution here, or not? Okay, it's taking some liberties because the king's still in the centre. The king is still in the centre, and often, you know, we're given as a generalisation, you shouldn't really undertake active operations with your king in the centre. Why is that? It's because the king's a massive liability, really, and with every liability or weakness you're creating, you create a lot of opportunities for the opponent to have counterplay and forcing sequences and all these nasty things that can happen in chess. So the king in the centre is one of those things. It's a major liability. So here we have c takes d5, knight takes d5, and the king checked, and it seems at first, isn't this harmless, bishop b5? Isn't it harmless? Well, the first thing to note, I think, that knight d7 might actually be uncomfortable, because knight e5, well, let's put this on the board. Knight e5, if black castled here, then maybe knight c6 is embarrassing. For example, getting the dark square bishop might be painful, or there might even be worse here. But black decides to interpose the bishop d7. So he's abandoning, you know, putting the bishop on this diagonal, b7. Now white plays again. I have to say, this reminds me of one of my losses in the club season, because it's so easy to underestimate a bishop b5 check. The huge problem now is white simply taking the bishop, and you might think, why on earth is this a problem? Why would bishop takes d7 be a problem? Do you see immediately why queen takes d7 would be so terrible here if black captured with the queen? And it happened to me, to be honest, in the club game recently in the season. This kind of bishop b5 check, you think it's a trivial thing, but it's not. It triggers forcing sequences, the king in the centre. Now here, if black takes with the queen on d7, what could white play here? I'll put this on the board. What would you play with white in this position if I gave you 20 seconds? Simple forcing move. Yeah? Yeah, just knight e5. And the problem is then that the queen has to go off the diagonal, and then we have more annoyance for black. We have queen a4 check for example. And it could end up to be like a disastrous situation where we can't even, maybe castle. Maybe we just take here, and this is annoying, and it just gets worse and worse. And it all starts from allowing this bishop b5. So bishop takes. Black took with the knight, and you might think, well, aren't the issues over? You just take it with the knight. You just cover the e5 square. The issues are over, surely. Not necessarily. There's new issues now. White seems to have another distinct advantage in this position. He takes on d5, so he's fixing the d5 pawn. Now he castles, and black castles, and now bishop f4. And actually, white still seems to have an annoying position. For example, on knight f6, there's knight e5, pouncing potentially onto the c6 square. So black might be keen to keep the knight on d7 here. Okay, so he plays rook e8, but now white is quick with rook c1, threatening the very annoying bishop c7, harassing the queen. And black naturally wants to try and parry this, but there's not too many comfortable ways of parrying bishop c7. Black plays rook c8. And here, can you see a positionally crushing move for white? If I gave you 20 seconds here, what can white play in this position? 20 seconds starting from now to think about this. Anyone? A very annoying move is available to white here. It looks like a very simple position. Yeah, just queen a4. Now if black takes, he's inviting entry points. This is really annoying. What does black do exactly about this a pawn? If a5, then there's all sorts of things which can happen now, which are not that pleasant. Maybe just simply, taking is dangerous, and then we can put another rook there, and black's having to protect this d7. How does he defend this? We could run into rook c7 here. If queen, yet again, this bishop c7 is a pain. Potentially, although that's a pin there, not so easy. But no, it just looks horrible. So black actually, after the simple queen a4, believe it or not, Cordova's already seems fed up with his position and makes things worse. Probably not the most lesser evil move. He makes things a lot worse. He plays the move g5, lashing out with g5. Alexander just takes on c8. And now just wins this pawn. Thank you very much. It's not just the pawn though, isn't it? It's fractures of the rest of the pawns. A lot of weaknesses here. Bishop takes g5. Bishop takes queen b7. Move h4 is played. b5. Queen goes to b3. f6. The queen can potentially switch over here as well. Bishop h6 threatening. Queen g3. King f7. So black's position is a wreck, clearly. Rook c1. Threatening. Well, if the knight moves, then there's rook c5. If the knight dares move. There's no rook c8. We can just take in and take on d5. So rook g8, and actually we see the simple bishop f4 and black actually resigning. This is a horrible threat of rook c7, and you might think, what a strange game. But really, this thing can happen to you if you underestimate bishop b5 check. If you're leaving your king in the center one move too long, you can easily underestimate bishop b5 check. I believe that because it's happened to me. If we look at this game again, black has to play, very carefully against this system. And this one move, b6, we see a drastic punishment, really. So it started with cd and this annoying check, and then it's just bishop takes d7 is actually really annoying. There's no queen d7 without knight e5. So knight takes d7, knight takes, leaving a horrible weakness on d5. And one thing about weaknesses, it can lead to positional collapse. The more weaknesses you have, the more liabilities, the more counterplay the opponent gets, the more opportunities tactically. But white's also got this c7 as well, and this queen a4. Black's queen is more passive compared to white's queen. That's a big advantage of the position here, that actually black's queen side is under greater pressure and scrutiny than white's queen side. White has a lot more initiative and pressure on the queen side here. So rook e8, rook c1. We see now this very powerful move, queen a4. And black lashes out. I'm not sure how many of you find this convincing. Should black have lost so quickly? Clearly g5, I mean, you wouldn't have thought g5 really helps black's position too much. But what else is black meant, to do in this position? Maybe it looks quite horrendous, really. Okay, so we see black lashing out and losing fairly quickly. So the game continued like this. So that's a much more clear-cut game. Did anyone get anything from that game out of interest at all? Well, I hope you did. Anyway, so let's go on to the next game. It was almost a miniature. A miniature has to be under 20 moves. This was 23 moves. Okay. Now against Alekhine, Germany team. Team Germany in 19. Okay, let's put this up on the board. So 1939, the 28th of August 1939. Okay, so Alekhine playing against Eric, actually, I guess. So, and he plays the same system as white. Black plays the Caro-Kann, maybe knowing Alexander plays this system, and maybe has prepared, I suspect, for e takes d5 and this c4 idea. So black plays knight f6, and after knight c3 we again see this e6 structure. Knight f3, bishop e7, and again now this c takes d5 idea, but black takes knight takes d5, and again even here we see bishop b5 check. So why bishop b5 check in this position? Well, it's leaving black, it seems, with a weak pawn. Whatever way black plays this position, he's going to be left with a weak pawn, because we've still got this mechanism, if the queen takes, of knight e5. And if we have knight there, we have knight takes, we have a weak d5 pawn, don't we? Well, let's see. Bishop d7, white took, knight takes d5. There's a weak d5 pawn in this position. White's got a slight grip here, a slight annoying pressure on d5, and he taps into that immediately with queen b3. Okay, and as Alekhine continues, knight b6, both sides castle, and this bishop f4. This looks familiar, but black's a lot safer than our previous game example. Black's a lot safer here, because this knight's actually quite useful potentially for knight c4. The queen side hasn't got so many holes in it. b7's shielded by the knight, so it's altogether quite different position. And in fact, this pressure on c7 is immediately able to be neutralized with bishop d6. Okay, bishop takes, queen takes. So here, I'm not sure we can say Alexander's approach here is a great success at all, actually, because we have a symmetrical, a perfectly symmetrical pawn structure. Where is white's initiative gone? Okay, rook fe1, rook ac8, rook ac1, h6. He has got a grip though on e5, which he uses, knight e5. So he's trying to provoke some weaknesses. If f6 is played, we have knight g6, for example. So this is a cause of annoyance, slight cause of annoyance. Rook c7, g3, giving the king some air, some luft. So rook fc8, an exchange of rooks. It's symmetrical pawn structure. So should we be that excited by this position? Well, queen b5 now actually creates a threat of queen e8 check, and then taking on f7 is on the cards. Knight d7, shielding the e8 square. Does white have anything? Anything at all? He actually takes on d7, check, h4. And it looks as though, hang on a sec, this is quite dangerous, this diagonal, especially if there was a pawn here. We could cause some structural damage, for example, potentially, or a nasty tactic of some sort. We see here a6, queen e2, dominating that e file for a moment. One question, if black had played rook e7, I think queen d3 might still be annoying there, but no, actually let's go with the game continuation. Queen e2, rook d8, rook e7, rook d7. So this rook's been evicted anyway from the 7th rank. So after all this, the opening really has been played very, very simply with minimal imbalances. All we've got different in the position is white's got the control of the e file. Is that really enough to do something with here? Very clear cut position, actually. We see g6. If g6 isn't played, then h5 is kind of starting to fix down the pawn structure over here, and would make queen d3 more meaningful in some cases, or maybe even queen f3 and then queen f5 would be annoying. Okay, so we see g6, h5, queen f6. At least we know, we're guaranteed that black surely cannot have too much counterplay in this position. It's very, very simplified, symmetrical pawn structure. Queen e3, and there might be some threats emerging now. Okay, so rook d6, queen b3, b7 is protected like this, and now hg. And in this position, actually, well, d5 is under fire here as well. Black plays queen takes g6, offering d5, which is taken for b2 trade. But f7, we see a splintering of black's pawn structure, so one advantage has emerged here. White all of a sudden has f7 to play on, so he plays rook f5, cutting the queen from this diagonal as well. So we're on f7, and now this is all of a sudden tricky for black. What actually can black play here? In the game, there's evidently some issue here which can't be addressed easily with, say, king g7. In the game, we see rook b5 offering f7 in the game continuation. So I wonder, if we look at king g7 as an example, what would white be able to play here? Anyone? You know, maybe queen e5 check is dangerous. I would say queen e5 check, because you don't want to play like f6. There's queen e7, and if the king moves here, it starts to look horrible, I think. Maybe just d5 is strong potentially, or rook f6. d5 actually hits the rook, and d6 starts to look a bit dangerous. Okay, so in the game continuation, anyway, he didn't like that for whatever technical reasons. So here he offers the f7 pawn. Rook takes f7, king g8, which looks a bit scary for this discovery check, which is used. But we get this rook and pawn ending, which maybe black was banking on for drawing here against Alexander. So rook and pawn ending here, king h7, rook b6, takes, check, rook b6. But actually we see here a fine technique. How do we win this rook and pawn ending? Well, we take this h6 pawn, okay, a5. We just basically march these two pawns and stay with our rook behind black's a pawn. So let's have a look at this, how Alexander plays it. He cuts off the king and he starts marching his pawns, and okay, there's a check here which is available, which is used, but now this pawn is always shielding these checks now. So this is reaching a critical point where the pawn can't make any further progress, and white simply plays king f6, and black's stuck. You know, white's just gonna do this, and there's nothing black can do. This pawn's not going anywhere. So this rook is optimally placed to stop the king and stop the pawn, with white herding the pawns. So what is interesting from a stylistic perspective, it just shows that Alexander was able to win from a dry symmetrical pawn structure start position. Although this opening really crushed the previous opponent, here, you know, black didn't make any major crimes, but still, even in this symmetrical position where much more sterile than the other game, he still managed to lose. So that's interesting, maybe. So there's a critical moment here where some advantage transformation occurred. Maybe around about here, maybe black could have improved, you know, his play, possibly. You can imagine a move like, I don't know, b5, maybe, possibly. No, we just take on d5, doubt it. So the problem is d5 all the time, as well as b7. Fairly big problem here. So we get this situation where after rook f5 it's becoming a little bit tricky now, and the exact details why, actually, after king g7 queen e5 are not entirely apparent, to be honest. Let's say king f8. Should we just check this out for a moment? Maybe check. And if queen g8, we take on h6. If here we can start having a raging attack, that's not too pleasant. Maybe this is why. If king g8, that doesn't look too pleasant either. d5, for example, does hit the rook, and this d pawn starts to be a menace. So maybe at this moment I can offer only that explanation. This looks pretty dangerous for black. Okay, so in the game we just see an endgame, a rook and pawn ending grind here. A little bit of technique to win this endgame from Alexander Alekhine. Okay, so let's go on to another game. So against Alberto Lopez Arce, A-R-C-E. So the country code is Cuba, Cuban team. Unfortunately for the spectators at the time, they were really looking forward to a Capablanca Alekhine game, but for some reason that day, maybe Capablanca didn't fancy it. He wasn't playing for the team that day, for the Cuban team. Okay, so instead we have Alberto Lopez Arce, A-R-C-E. So Alexander playing white plays e4, and okay, Lopez, I'll call him from now on, plays e5, and okay, we have knight f3, knight c6, a royal pairs, a6, bishop retreats, knight f6. And this is a bit fresh, old but fresh, because usually a lot of GMs are now keen on d3 sometimes, among other things, or later after castling d3. We see knight c3, which you might think is a little bit stodgy, but it does create a grip on the d5 square. So b5, bishop b3, bishop e7, both sides now castle, and Alexander plays now knight d5, and there's a little issue here. It must be an issue that knight takes e4 runs into stuff. Just basically rook e1, and then we can take on e5, maybe simple, unless there's anything even stronger than that, which I can't spot at the moment. There might be something about this diagonal at some point as well, but I think just rook e1 is simple and strong. But black didn't take on e4. Black plays bishop b7, giving up the dark square bishop here, which is snapped up. And now knight takes e7, offering the e5 pawn. And black his idea is not to take on e4 here. He's playing the aggressive now move c5, trying to trap Alexander's poor bishop. What is this? White now can play a dual purpose move though. White avoids the bishop being trapped and protects the pawn. So avoids c4 and he's protecting his pawn. So what's happening here? Black's getting a very liberated game though with this quick d5. Is it worth a pawn? That's the question. Is this really worth a pawn in this position? E takes d5, knight e takes d5, rook e1, queen b6, and okay, if black's given opportunities, we can see this is going to be quite dangerous. But actually we see the move c4, a little bit reminiscent of the c4 Magnus Carlsen played in the recent candidates tournament. Even with this potentially backward d pawn, it's good to kick this knight on d5 here in this position. So here white's increased the grip over the d5 square, and now bishop g5 threatens, I think, just taking and then knight d7 to win the exchange, even if that was taking there. Rook a8. Now white takes on b5, a takes. So what's the idea with this weakened pawn? We see now queen c1. The knight's holding the pawn for a moment anyway. So queen c1, queen d6, now a4, putting pressure on the e5 knight. That's protected. Queen d4, the bishop goes back. Knight cd5. It's starting to get a bit shaky here, black's position. What's going on here? A takes. The idea knight b4. It looks potentially as though, isn't black going to get this pawn, and this bishop looks good. There might be some play here. Queen c3. Knight fd5. White takes the queen off. C takes. I don't think the black player was that strong actually, because this isn't such a convincing gambit. After rook ed1, where is black's counterplay? The thing that black might be looking at when looking at trying to evaluate these positions is the structure is a bit wrecked. So normally, how many pawns are we up really? I mean, we're up 2 pawns, but the structure is wrecked. So on the surface, does this offer black a reasonable game? The thing is, the game doesn't last too long from here, because black plays here the move rook a8, and now Alexander just plays the move knight c6. And this is actually really bad. This is really bad news for black. Because, well, what can black actually do here? He's tied in knots. If he takes on c6, black actually resigned here. If he takes on c6, I think we just play bishop takes d5. I think that's a pretty nasty move to have to handle here. What can black actually do? If I give you 20 seconds to have a look at this position. So Alexander Alekhine has just played knight c6 against you. If I flip the board, what can you do here after knight c6? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now, can anyone save the position? Coming to think about it, you don't want to trade on a1. You're just improving white's infiltration chance of getting to a7 quickly. And white might also be threatening bishop d6, by the way. I think it's pretty grim. I'm not sure the whole gambit concept was that sound in this game, actually. So maybe we should swiftly move on, or just quickly review this game from the white perspective. Let's just quickly review this game. Okay, so black played a dodgy kind of gambit. Why didn't he just take on e4? Was there a big problem with that? He didn't fancy this. In h5, let's be crude about it. Blimey. Sorry, I think queen h5 is strong here. There might be method in black's madness of this game. What do we do about queen h5 here from this opening position? How do we defend this without offering white chronic weaknesses? Because we've lost the dark square bishop. The problem's already evident. We've lost the dark square bishop. If we play g6, it's inviting horrible stuff later, coming around for the dark squares. So even in this opening position after queen h5, if white had taken on e4 with the knight. Okay, so d5. Let's go with d5. I guess. Yeah. It shouldn't be that bad, should it? Should it? Okay. So for whatever reason, black went in for this crazy gambit. So c5. So we need to maybe engine check this game to get the real truth of it. So d5. Okay, black seems to have active pieces, but is it really enough for the pawn? c4 really is putting black under pressure on the back foot again, and a4 is really trying to encourage the pawns to be fixed, and that will give white the c4 square. That'd be quite horrendous, as well as a passed a pawn. So I think black started crumbling around about here already. Being this second pawn down, it's not nice. It's just falling to pieces. Okay, so knight c6, and that was the end of that game. Okay, let's have a look at one more, shall we? Just one more, or is it? It's quite a long one actually. Okay. As far as decisive wins with white, just for completeness, I've got this masochistic tendency to try and make sure we cover all the decisive games with white. So let's have a look at this last decisive game with white. So even though it's been about an hour now, I think, but no, okay, let's go again with this game, which isn't a trivial game. quite a complex, involved game, I think. And it's a Sicilian defence. So his opponent here is Bulgaria, BUL. It's Alexander Zvetkov, TZV ETKOV. Okay, so 24th of August 1939. So we see E4 from Alexander, and Sicilian defence. Sorry, I'm doing the first names and they're both called Alexander. Pardon me. Alekhine playing white. Alekhine plays E4. Zvetkov plays C5. Okay, let's not do the Mikhail thing like last time. So knight F3 D6, and he plays now a kind of delayed C3 Sicilian. Alekhine plays the C3 Sicilian here. Knight F6, and white is tempted here to play E5, and he does go for it. He plays E5. D takes, knight takes. And this can be a nuisance for these bishop b5 check reasons again. This simple idea of bishop b5 check is being demonstrated in these games. I think this adds a lot of weight for bishop b5 to be annoying here. Just this knight takes e5. And black maybe gets a little bit scared here, and he offers his structure on the plate. He offers knight c6. Horrendous double pawns, you might think. So white just takes that and just plays bishop c4. I think it's already an opening success. It's 1939. There aren't opening books and stuff. People are improvising much earlier. But it looks as though black's pawn structure is a wreck without too much compensation. We see bishop f5, d3, e6. Now queen f3 targeting c6. That's protected. h3. Bishop e7, knight d2. Isn't d3 a weakling, you might ask? Well, it's picked on with rook d8, and white just castles. But is there going to be a trade? The d pawn for the c6 pawn. Black does take, and we get this kind of trade. Queen d7, queen a6. I think we can say structurally, out of the opening, white's still better. White's got the c4 square here, and a better structure here than these pawns. Has black got dynamic play, or is it enough? Let's see. After castles knight c4, already white does seem to have a comfortable position. You know, maybe he can play a move like bishop f4, and keep this bishop on this diagonal here, and start to build pressure from there. But actually, black. Sorry, there's a question here. Alekhine just saying off the night. See you in the endgame. Yeah, I guess he's just saying that. Thank you, Chess Tim. So we see queen c7, maybe against bishop f4. And now, actually, as you say, Chess Tim, see you in the endgame. Alekhine says, see you in the game with queen a5. Get the queens off. On plan the structure. Maybe his opponents are underestimating Alekhine's endgame here. Black does take the queens off. Okay, so knight takes. So how do these structural weaknesses translate into a potentially lost position? Let's see if we're going to find out. So bishop e3, it's picked on the c5 pawn. Knight's kicked. Knight b3, that's protected again. The target is fixed in sight, c4, suppressing black's use of the d5 square with the knight. So the knight's also restricted and fixing this target. King f8, and occupying this d file now, and it's painful already that black can't contest this, and there might be some entry points all around the shop now. We're tied down to c5. d7 looks to be the most critical. The knight's defending it. Is it a big deal? What if white doubles? We see rook d6. Black's treating that seriously. An exchange of rooks, recharged with rook d1. King comes to the rescue, king e7. So is this c5 pawn a big deal in this position? Or a7? We see knight a5 here. It looks as though a potential threat might be knight b7 here, attacking the bishop and the pawn. Bishop e5, maybe in light of that, attacking b2. Now, a cunning little move, not b3. He wants to try and create an invasion point. And I think that this move ticks that box. That white wants to get an infiltration point into black's position. Black, by the way, cannot play, of course, rook d8 because of knight c6 check. That would be embarrassing. So there's no problem with rook d8 here. Can you guess what Alexander plays in this position? This is quite interesting, I think, to test as a little test. What would you play in this position if I gave you 20 seconds starting from now? Anyone? No, not f4, not b4. That's a clue. Anyone else? Not rook d2. Go. That's too passive. An aggressive move with the rook. What aggressive move do you have with the rook here? Right, rook d3. The rook can switch like this, can't it? Can get in on b7. We want to get to the 7th rank. There's a lot of pawns statistically on the 7th rank, and you know, rooks can be greedy on the 7th rank. I think it was Yasser Serwan that originated the idea that a rook on the 7th is like a greedy pig on the 7th. It's got lots of pawns to eat on the 7th statistically, but this in itself stems from Nxb5 talking about, in particular, the rook on the 7th rank being very, very powerful concept. So rook d3 is tied with this concept that you want to get the rook to the 7th rank. The infiltration point is b7 here. Black defends the 7th rank in advance. Rook b3. Okay, we've got an infiltration point potentially on b8 as well. Tactically, it seems a bit scary to use b8 because of that bishop. Knight d7. It's stopped anyway. And now we see f4, forcing move. And the king steps towards the centre. Knight b6. And the king steps towards the centre again. King d7. And the rook switches back now. Okay, it's done a bit of damage. The damage is quite subtle. There's a bit of congestion. What is the knight actually doing there? It's not attacking this pawn. There's a nasty pin. Some damage has been done, or rather some issues have been created. Black unpins. It's not enough in itself. Black, we need to get more mistakes out of black to win this. g4, starting to put the pressure on. So f5 coming up maybe, or just gaining space. Actually just gained space. h4, knight a4, and now back. Rook b3, knight goes back. Does the rook want to return to d3? No. We see actually rook b5, and it looks as though, hold on a sec, this could be quite dangerous potentially if it wasn't for c4 dropping off. King d7, h5. So white's gradually gaining a little bit of space here. a3, and now actually, you know, we start to realise we have actually got a pawn majority here, and b4 is potentially tactically painful for black. King d7. If it wasn't for this c pawn being vulnerable, then b4 would be great perhaps. King e4. So the king is actually starting to want to support c4, so we can drive through b4 without dropping c4. The king is coming to d3. And now, can we play b4? No, we can't play b4 here because the rook will be trapped. Surely a6. No, not a6. No, it's not played here. Let's not guess. Alekhine in this position plays knight b3. What if what if he did play b4 here? Can anyone see a tactical issue with this? Can anyone see a tactical issue? What has black got available here? Or maybe possibly, I don't know, it is playable. I can't quite spot it at the moment. Anyone? Otherwise we'll just carry on with the game continuation. He didn't play b4 here, he played knight b3, which seems strong as well, just putting pressure on c5 again. Knight a4, knight d2, protecting b2. Maybe he's coming round for b4. King c6, b3, and again he's delaying the use of b4 here. He plays knight e4, so I don't know, he's putting pieces on optimal pressure points for this c5 pawn, and the king is guarding c4 as well. Knight d7, rook a5, so both weaknesses are now attacked. Bishop e7, and now we see actually not b4 at all. Well, b4 suppressed, and this bishop's helping prevent b4. We see knight c3, big threat now. Knight b5, just to go for this a7 pawn. Double attack emerging. Black in advance of that plays rook b7. We see knight b5, and black defending the a7 pawn. But here, this is awkward because this is the pin. Now b4 has great effect in this position, and it's played b4 here. So black is starting to crumble after all. b4 is instrumental after all. So a6, knight c3, and now of course there's knight a4 as well potentially. So king c7 is played, dropping a6. This is taken. Black takes on b4, and we see check. King d8, a takes, bishop takes, but now white is a pawn up. Rook takes e6. Finally, after all that positional play and manoeuvring, white's managed to win a pawn. So some cause for celebrations. He's won a pawn after all that, getting the king to d3 and timing everything perfectly. He's won a pawn. Okay, so let's see some technique now. Bishop c5, bishop d2, knight f8, the rook goes to c6 here, knight d7, and the king steps in now menacingly. King e4, king e7, king d5, driving the bishop back or somewhere. Bishop goes to g1, but this abandons this diagonal, so pouncing on the diagonal. Check. King d8, and can you spot the final move of the game? Wow. Oh, this is a crusher. Oh, this is a really crushing blow. The final move of the game, move 58. So what does white play in this position? That's quite an abrupt, sudden finish to this game. If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. No, you're just giving up the rook. Rook's here. No, someone's got it. Someone's got it on Play Chess. Pat MC. I think you've got it there, Pat. Anyone on Twitch before I show you? It's the final move of the game. Come on. Okay, I'll give you another 20 seconds starting from now. Nope, not king d6. Nope, not bishop a5. These might be winning, but what did Alekhine play? I think it looks really clear cut what he played to me. It's not rook a6. Okay, a clue. Should I give a clue? The king's quite aggressive, to say the least. Anyone? Alright, I have to show you. Someone's mentioned it on Play Chess. Well done to Pat MC. It's not King D6. Maybe King D6 is dangerous, but you know, even stronger than King D6. King D6 blocks in your own bishop. Do you really want to do this? You're cutting down your resourcefulness on this diagonal. If you're blocking this bishop with your own king, unless you've got something very concrete in mind, there's something which keeps your resources open. It's King E6. It simply threatens Bishop E7 check. King here, Rook C8, mating. There's no way to evict the king from here, because Knight F8 we just take. We're threatening, surely, in this position, Bishop E7 check. Agreed? We're also threatening, well, I think that's the principal threat, because Bishop A5, well, Knight B6, I don't know, but Bishop E7 is very, very clear, a mating 2 threat. Bishop E7, Rook C8. So it was a bit of a grind. So I've showed you some, these aren't neat little, sweet little games, 20 moves. I've shown you games raw from this Olympiad. This isn't games in a games collection. This is raw games from the 1939 Olympiad with white. The brutality of, you know, having to subtly use positional manoeuvring until opponents are broken down. So he did get an advantage from the opening, but there was a lot of work carried out here on the C5 and A7 pawns. A lot of work getting the king to D3 was one strategic operation, and this timing for the worst possible point for B4, when there's a pin on B4, he gets this situation where the king is contorted here to have to play this terrible move to protect the pawn. So he's putting the king to be pinned. So finally B4, and now black starts collapsing, because actually there's a weakness over here as well. This E6 pawn, after a forcing move sequence, white's getting the E6 pawn, which means the D5 square has now dropped off. No pawn there means the king can start marching to D5. So it's a systematic collapse of black's position. The D5 square and now the E6 square, and that's it. Oh yes, as Amazing Guy points out, Bishop E7, King E8, Knight D6 is also mate. Yeah. Let's put that on the board. Yeah. We can make with the knight as well as the rook. There isn't actually another game. I know it's more than an hour now, but what I found interesting, there was a game against Paul Kaz, but that was a draw. I don't know if I want to look at that next week. I don't know, some of those games are sort of instructive, I thought, anyway, so I hope you found some of them instructive, and I'll put it on YouTube, this video, so hope you got something from it, and I'll see you next week. Okay, so have a good week. Thanks very much.